Hi, I wanted to talk to you today about Slaughter Hotel. You may know this film under a different title. It was released under no fewer than a dozen over the years on VHS and in cable. Around the world, it had different titles. You may know it as Asylum Erotica or Cold Blooded Beast, which is the closest to the original title of any of those retitling. It is a giallo film in the purest sense. It doesn't have quite as many of the later psychedelic effects that you'd expect from something made maybe 5, 6 years later, but it is still a pretty trippy experience. And it still has all the hallmarks you expect from a good giallo. Speaking of Hallmark, which of course became the company that released Last House on the Left, for instance, among other titles, it was the one that released this thing in America. Now, AIP apparently had it in some regions as well, but every distributor that ever handled this film recut it for their local audience. And with good reason. Slaughter Hotel is a very graphic film, and both in the murders, especially for the time period. This is 1971. This is just a few years removed from Night of the Living Dead, and here we have graphic beheadings, we have impalements, we have a strangulation followed by a post-mortem re-strangulation. It's a very, very violent film, especially for the time period. And on top of that, it has some extremely explicit sexuality. By this I mean you do not just get full frontal nudity, you get sex acts on camera. Kino Lorber have released this on Blu-ray, and it's a great looking disc compared to every other version that's ever existed of this movie that I've seen. That said, it's still a rough movie, and I think it's always going to be a rough movie. Through no fault of its own, except through budget and time and lack of preservation, the film looks cheap. Although it looks cheap in that very specific 35mm early 70s film look. It has a atmosphere all of its own because of the time period it came out and the way people are dressed and act. I've always been both repelled by the film and absolutely magnetically attracted to it. It's really not a good film in any sort of way. And I wouldn't even call it a guilty pleasure, to be honest with you, because you're not going to want to watch this film a lot. I bought it for a couple reasons, and I'm going to let you behind the curtain on something in order to explain exactly why. On the panelist show, Region Free, that I'm a part of, we have a private chat. And we spend a lot of that time talking about movies and their availability or lack thereof, or what's coming out on this format, or what just hit YouTube in a stream, and grab it while you can. Cameron from Obnoxious and Anonymous makes a point of always letting us know when these boutique labels are having sales. And he pointed out that Kino Lorber were having their annual sale, and it turned out it was a really good one. Normally, I am not really moved to buy titles just because they're $6 or $7 below their normal, already inflated retail price. In this case, this sale was bringing titles that go for $30 down to $12 and $14, and a lot of these titles that I grew up watching on VHS, albeit in very truncated and honestly horrible transferred form, I couldn't resist buying them at that price point. Slaughter Hotel is a perfect title to pick up on sale if you want to experience it uncut, because you're not going to find this streaming in uncut form pretty much anywhere. I recommend it even though it's a flawed disc. There is multiple times where there is sound missing, and it still seems to be not completely uncut. There seems to be a few jump cuts in a few places that don't belong. That said, I don't think you're ever going to get an opportunity to own this movie as complete or looking as cleaned up as it looks. So I cannot stress that if you have an interest in the movie, the Kino Lorber disc is definitely the way to go. Now, the film stars the great Klaus Kinski, who I'm sure you know from any number of works, probably from Nosferatu or its horrifically bad sequel. He's actually playing a fairly low-key role for such an eccentric actor. And I think he was being used properly. He's obviously a red herring. You can't think that he's not the murderer while you watch this film. And I guess I just spoiled something by saying that, but it's really not a film that has a lot of suspense going for it. It's a film where you're waiting for the next bit of nudity or the next murder sequence. And you do have to wait quite a while for those murder sequences to start up, but once they do, I promise you there's nothing shy about them. The plot is where I'm probably going to get into trouble with some of the viewers of this video. It's about a kind of halfway house insane asylum for people with troubles who are on the mend, and the doctors who take care of them. And meanwhile, a psychotic killer has infiltrated the hospital and is intent on taking them out one by one. Does that sound familiar to you? So yeah, I mean, there's no getting around the fact that one of my least favorite popular horror films, as it were, popular now, not when it came out, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, owes everything to this movie. It's not the same movie. Obviously, Friday 5 is a lot faster paced. There's not nearly as much attention paid to characters in that film as there is in this film. But it owes pretty much the whole shebang to this little movie. And that's probably going to get me in trouble when I say I like this movie a whole lot more. But that shouldn't be a big surprise to any of you, right? But I hesitate to say if you like Friday 5, watch this, because they're so different as far as what they're attempting to accomplish. This is more concerned with building mood and atmosphere, and it's very concerned with the exploitation elements in a much more raw sense. Friday 5 is kind of a kind of film where a girl will tear open her shirt and say "Showtime" so that the audience all get a big laugh and a grin, right? This film lingers. It definitely has more in common with early 70s erotic cinema than with that kind of teasing playfulness, as sleazy as that could be, from the mid-80s. I want to be clear that this is not something that you should watch with family members. You probably want to watch this as a solo movie. And there's nothing wrong with movies that push boundaries. In fact, I kind of find it embarrassing that we're, coming up on 50 years later, and this movie is still gonna be uncomfortable to watch with, your significant other or with your mom. It was a time when this kind of film could be made unapologetically, and I think that's a good thing. You may feel different, and I can understand that. If you don't like giallos, or if you only like the big giallos, those made by Argento and Fulci and Martino, the big guys with immense talent and some money behind them, this might not be for you. But if you want to see what was happening more, down in the trenches in Italy with the giallos in the early 70s, before the formula was really set in stone, but they understood the elements that needed to be involved, if you want to see how they wanted to appeal to different audiences, including like the grindhouses, the 42nd Street houses that would play, porno and kung fu and horror films, this is exactly that. I think it might be the best example of this moment in Italian horror at that time. So, I guess if you've never seen Slaughter Hotel, do yourself a favor. Next time Kino Lorber has a sale, think about picking it up. I promise it's not like anything else you're going to watch that week, that month, or that year. I also promise you won't regret having had the experience. You might not end up liking the movie, but you will not regret having experimented on it, because it delivers everything it promises to, which is something that today's cinema can't seem to get right.